Hello, and welcome to this special edition of 1036 Vote 2020. I'm Portia Young. November 3rd is now just weeks away, so we want to spend this next half hour listening to what you, the voters, have to say. We'll start in 3 Milwaukee neighborhoods where voters talk porch politics with Milwaukee PBS producers about the presidential candidates, the pandemic's effect on the economy, and the Black Lives Matter movement.
The November election is less than 3 months away, and regardless of who wins, this is a pivotal moment in the country. With all the chaotic changes we've seen in 2020, we wanted to hear from the people who have the final say, voters.
So Milwaukee PBS producers went to 3 Milwaukee County neighborhoods to ask people who they're voting for and the issues they care about most.
Wisconsin was the tipping point state in 2016, so it's no wonder the Dems chose Milwaukee for the convention. So the big question remains.
If you had to vote today, you vote for Biden?
I will vote for Biden.
Why?
To get Trump out of office, just simply said. Yeah, ain't no other way to say it.
What are your thoughts for the upcoming election?
To keep it honest, I mean, I'm 30 years old, so I haven't voted since Bush. I went into the military then, so it was a lot different. I was always I've been recently told to more likely focus on your legislature more than your president at this point.
So when you voted in the Bush election, what made you vote then
My
versus?
parents.
Are you just turning
My parents, my mom, my dad, they were voting for Bush, and I just turned 18, so I'm just oh, mom and dad's voting, I'm gonna vote for Bush too.
So if you had to vote today, who would you vote for?
To be honest, to keep it real with you, I probably wouldn't. I haven't voted. They say your vote matters, yeah, all this, but I just have a different mindset. I work as a server, and even when we shut down, we had car sides to go and everything like that. I mean, unlike him, I've gotten my unemployment, stuff like that. I just want to I have kids to focus on too. So, and then the national debt and all that is what I think about, things like that more than, okay, what's going on with this election.
The election for tomorrow, who would you vote for?
Trump and Pence.
Trump and Pence. And why that ticket?
Well, I'm Republican is one thing, and I just think we need to keep things moving in a safe and controlled environment rather than chaotic.
What's really important to you? Some of the big issues that makes you go to the polls?
Well, being retired recently, the economy also, I'd like to see inflation kept at bay, and I think the economy was rolling along pretty well up until COVID happened, and that helps me out as a retired guy. Well, safety and protection are big things for me, and having grandchildren, I want them to be safe and protected too.
Has the coronavirus pandemic affected you at all?
Not too much. I'm not paranoid about that. We do follow the precautions that are outlined for us, but we're not panicking about anything. To me, having lived again longer than any of you, it's just another flu. This one happens to be a little more contagious.
Another big story in the news right now is the Black Lives Matter movement. Just what are your views on sort of the protests and the demonstrations right now?
Well, I certainly like justice for all, and I like treating all people equally. And as I told you, I've been a professor at a number of colleges. But I'm concerned about the underlying, perhaps, movement or background of Black Lives Matter or Antifa or anything that might be subterfuged.
So I'm 17. My birthday's on October 28th, and that's 5 days or 6 days before the election, and it'll be my first time.
If you had to vote today, who would you vote for?
Well, I was thinking Joe Biden, but I'm still deciding and thinking because I haven't really looked onto it that much, who's running and what they're trying to do for the country.
You were mentioning issues that are important to the Mexican-American community. Can you talk a little bit about what issues you're referring to, or what issues kind of stand out as most important to you?
Immigration sometimes is hard for us with the new rules and new laws.
Sometimes when I go into a certain area, let's say a store, you're looked differently because of the color of your skin.
But if the election were tomorrow, who would you vote for?
Obviously Biden.
And are you excited about his candidacy?
Let's just say he's the best out of a bad situation.
And what issues are most important to you?
First of all, to what we're going to do to finally fix this whole pandemic, and how you're going to take care of all the people that have lost their jobs. From COVID-19, my father, he died. Yeah, Mississippi it's very bad down there. And my mother had caught it too. They both had caught it at the same time. And when they took it in, all the hospitals they were trying to get to were all booked. They were full. My mother, she had to go to the north part of the state because they only had one bed left. And my dad, he had to go probably like 3 hours away. And by the time he got there, all his organs had failed. And it's just a mess. And a week later, he finally passed, and it's tough. But thank God my mother's okay, though.
Does it infuriate you to see how mask wearing has become political and like just the response? I mean, are you angry?
I work at Patrick Cudahy, so all day I'm wearing full mask for like 8 to 10, 12 hours. And you put up a hissy fit because you don't want to put on a mask for just a few minutes out of your day. I mean, come on.
So we got a big presidential election coming up in November. What are your thoughts about it?
Well, I'm hoping Trump wins. The economy's never been better. Unemployment's never been better. I haven't been laid off since he's been in office. We've been busy. I've always been a Republican, and I think he's keeping socialism away. That's the way I see Democrats trying to make this society these days.
In addition to the pandemic, the other big news story right now has been the Black Lives Matter movement. A lot of protests, a lot of demonstrations in the city throughout the country. What are your views on this movement?
I think it's kind of ridiculous. I mean, it's just getting way out of control with the Black Lives Matter and stuff. I think all lives matter, but as soon as you start to say that, you get in trouble.
And you're definitely voting in November?
Yeah, I'm definitely voting.
And do you have a preference for going into a building and doing in-person or doing mail-in voting?
I'll go in person instead of the mail-in. I think there's just if people can get out and do everything else, I don't see why they can't get out and do the actual going out to vote. So, and there's just too much cause for voter fraud, I think, with the mail-in stuff.
Can you tell us a little bit about how you're feeling for the upcoming election?
Well, Biden is my choice because Trump is just irritating.
What would you say is the most pressing issue that needs to be addressed by whoever is chosen to be president?
The pandemic. That's the most important thing. Because if we don't get this under control, we're not going to have anything. Nothing will ever be the same again.
What would you say is the most pressing issue that you want to be addressed in the 2020 election?
Mine is, well, of course, the pandemic. Education, that's the main thing, education. People, as far as not only just black, white, Italian, whatever the case, because there's there's only one race, human race.
Racial issues and protests following police shootings are topics in a recent Marquette University Law School poll. Senior political reporter Zach Schultz from our partners at PBS Wisconsin in Madison has more on that. Zach?
Thanks, Portia. I had a chance to talk with poll director Charles Franklin about his latest survey results. Here's part of that conversation. Now, your latest polling was in the field right after the conventions, and it appears the race for president is relatively unchanged, even with the Libertarian candidate in the mix.
That's right. We added the Libertarian this time explicitly for the first time, so that was a change. But we've really seen a pretty tight race with a small but consistent Biden lead. Since May, we've had Biden ahead with likely voters by 4 points, by 6, by 5, and now by 4 this time. Jorgensen, the Libertarian, gets 4% this time. And that's kind of notable. That's about what the Libertarian candidate got in 2016. But the question is, as we get closer to the election, can she sustain that support? But between Trump and Biden, we've just been seeing 1 percentage point differences over time. It has come down from June to August to September, but just by 1 point each time. That's not strong enough to identify that as a trend. But I think a close race, small advantage Biden would be the easy way to wrap up the summer.
Now, one of the reasons regular polling is worthy of coverage is to measure which events actually shift public opinion. And in this case, you've been asking about approval of protests against police shootings. And we saw a drop in support over the summer, but there really wasn't a change after the shooting of Jacob Blake in Kenosha and the protests that occurred afterwards, correct?
That's right, and I think it's important to understand that. Support for protests and for Black Lives Matter was high in June. There was an immediate sympathetic reaction, I think. But by early August, before the events in Kenosha, we had seen a couple of months of continued protests. We had seen some images of vandalism in that, including in Madison and elsewhere here in the state. But we had also seen additional examples of police violence against people of color. And so there were both of these messages going on, and President Trump had already started talking about the protests in terms of law and order and violence and revolutionaries, as he sees it. And so people had already had all of those messages. The events in Kenosha were vivid, dramatic, and important, but they weren't new. And as a result, people didn't change their minds, particularly after it.
And I've been doing interviews recently, and a lot of Republicans tell me they're convinced Kenosha is an inflection point in this race, and Trump's law and order message is resonating. But your latest poll was in the field during the time that Trump visited Kenosha, and you found the only people that changed their minds were Republicans.
That's right. About half the sample, of just over 400, were interviewed before he came, and about half interviewed after he came. There was very little movement, but a big move among Republicans who became much more approving of the way the president has handled the protests, going from 65% approval to 87%. But among independents and Democrats, there was hardly any change at all. So this is an example of preaching to the choir, and you got an amen from the choir, but that choir was already voting for him, and that's why it didn't change the vote very much.
Another thing that occurred while your poll was in the field was a lot of kids went back to school, some virtually, some in person. Your poll found 51% of people were uncomfortable with reopening schools, and notably there was a big shift among parents with school-aged children.
I think it's striking that non-parents, people without a kid in the household at least, barely changed between early August and now. But parents flip-flopped. They went from, the 40s uncomfortable, 50s comfortable, to exactly the opposite of that, more uncomfortable than comfortable. We'll see how that shapes up in a month as schools try to reopen or some stay with online instruction.
And when you look at the numbers from around the state, there's a big difference between areas and how comfortable they are with schools reopening.
Yeah, we see that, urban areas are much more uncomfortable than rural areas. Also, we saw that areas that have had significant outbreaks, like in the Green Bay area, we saw a little more discomfort than in areas that have been less affected.
Is there room for October surprises in just the last few seconds?
There's less than there was. About half as many people say they're undecided now, and less than half as many say they dislike both presidential candidates, down to about 8% that don't like either Trump or Biden. It was 21% in 2016. That reduces volatility, but let's remember what happened last time.
You asked whether people have a favorable impression of police, and while statewide 73% say yes, it's a different picture when you look at that by race.
It's a night and day kind of difference between people of color and white people. We've seen this consistently over the summer with a little bit of change, but what you see is a plurality, at least, of Black and Hispanic respondents have a net unfavorable view of police, while white people have a positive view of police by a strong margin. The one thing we saw is between before Kenosha and after Kenosha, views by people of color got more negative, So did whites, but by just about a 3-point shift, so much smaller for white folks. I think the upshot here is it just reflects how different the experience of life with the police is between people of color and white citizens.
The results from the next Marquette Law School poll will be released in October. Back to you, Portia.
Thank you, Zach. We'll hear more from Zach and our PBS Wisconsin partners as we continue our election coverage in the coming weeks. Political analysts say President Trump needs to win big in rural communities, including here in Wisconsin, as he did in 2016. We spent some time in the northwest part of the state to get a sense of what folks there are thinking 4 years later. America's heartland is historically where political candidates find a strong conservative base. Rural Wisconsin is traditionally no different.
Loyal's in the middle of a conservative area, and I can't foresee that changing in my lifetime.
That's Dean Laser, editor of the Tribune Record Gleaner newspaper in Loyal, a small dairy town in the northwest part of the state. Loyal is also in Clark County, where there are twice as many dairy cows as people. Milwaukee PBS, along with Milwaukee Journal Sentinel reporter Rick Barrett and photographer Mark Hoffman, have been spending a lot of time in Loyal and Clark County documenting the future of the dairy industry. We talked a little politics along the way, given it's a presidential election year. Laser says fiscal conservatism and the abortion issue drive the large Republican vote in Loyal and Clark County. He says this is definitely Republican territory, no matter who the candidate. He acknowledges being the odd man out as a Democrat.
Nobody seems to be able to meet in the middle or listen to the other side. This is what I think, and if you don't, in fact, I had I'm not so sure, a good friend of mine a couple weeks ago called me an idiot because I'm not voting for Trump in fall, so there you have it.
Laser says COVID-19 also widened the divide, a divide he thinks became clear 4 years ago.
To me, that divide started in 2016 when Hillary and Trump ran against each other. So there was an axe one right down the middle and severed that wide open, and it never healed, and this just strengthens that. You talk to the people are either open everything back up and forget about the sick people, to the other, shut everything down. And it's very, if you're a conservative, you want it open. If you're a liberal, you don't. I see that very clearly around here and the people I talk to.
Farmers, a large population in this county, have traditionally voted Republican and have taken a big economic hit over the last 5 years. Young dairy farmers Robin and Chris Reith say they haven't quite made up their minds, but understand why there is still so much support for President Trump in Clark County.
This is still pretty conservative Trump country around here, too. I mean, they support the president in this area.
Well, yeah, and then the Republican Party started here in Wisconsin, too. Mm-hmm. I guess that's what, what people like about Trump, too. He just, if he says he's going to do something, he does it, Mm-hmm. And I guess that's what a lot of people around here like.
Yeah.
Because that's what people are around here. People are true to their word around here. So I think that has a lot to do with it.
You don't know how the person really is unless you meet them face to face, which is hard to do.
Some political writers think Donald Trump winning rural Wisconsin might be harder to do this time around. He won Wisconsin 4 years ago in small towns like Loyal and in rural counties. Trump won non-metro counties collectively by almost 19 points. No Republican nominees since the 1980s had won them by more than 5, according to Craig Gilbert, Washington bureau chief for the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel. But this is 2020.
On the farm front and on the economy, because I think a lot of these voters, did vote for Trump in 2016 and are closer to the Republican Party, generally speaking, than the Democratic Party, they were willing, when I talked to them, to sort of give Trump, to cut him a little slack as much as they were hurting. And they were hurting for reasons not just, caused by Donald Trump and the trade wars. They were hurting for a variety of other reasons in terms of the farm economy in Wisconsin. So they were willing to cut the president some slack and try to have a little patience. Now, we're deeper into this now, and there's been some recovery for some farmers, but not for all farmers. And so it's an open question in my mind going into the November election, how many farmers who, will vote exactly the same way as they voted in 2016. I don't think we're going to see a wholesale abandonment of President Trump by rural voters that voted for him or farmers that voted for him. But we could see some erosion, and we may be seeing some erosion because in the polling, he's not getting the margins out of rural Wisconsin that he got in the 2016 election.
I mean, for years, James Carville, Bill Clinton, it's the economy, stupid. So those pocketbook bread and butter issues don't seem to really apply right now.
Well, I think what's happened, and it's not just rural voters, it's everybody. People are seeing the economy through a political prism more than they used to.
All the machinery is getting bigger, the trucks are getting bigger.
Marty Niggin is a dairy and crops farmer in Greenwood, just outside of Loyal. One main issue weighs on his mind.
Trade would be the number one thing, with China, if they could get that all resolved, and we could trade with every country and not have problems there, our products would move a lot better, and then I think our prices would become more stable. That's what I think. I've got mixed feelings both ways. I don't believe in political signs on my property because we do business with a lot of people, and I don't want them to be swayed that I'm one way or the other. So I like to pick candidates that I like, and I don't like to talk politics. I really don't. It's not my thing. It's not our priority to talk about politics. It just isn't. Some things get said here and there. I think is what it is. We're too busy getting our work done and paying attention to our lifestyle and our living that we don't spend a lot of time thinking about it.
We wanted to talk a bit more presidential politics with Craig Gilbert, who says the pandemic is certainly a big issue, especially because of its impact on the economy. What does this mean for seniors? I did see some polling that Joe Biden is leading among seniors, more so than Hillary Clinton did 4 years ago. Is it because of the pandemic or is it something else?
In Wisconsin, I don't think it's because of the pandemic. It may be in some other states, but it's interesting because nationally seniors, were just about Donald Trump's best group nationally in 2016, best age group, I should say. But in Wisconsin, they weren't. In Wisconsin, you had sort of Trump doing his worst among the youngest and oldest segments of the electorate. And his, the age group that was his base were people in their 40s and 50s. And that's still true. So you have this interesting, curve in Wisconsin where voters under 40 and particularly under 30 and voters 60 and over are the voters that Joe Biden is doing best with. If you were born in the baby boom and you were an early baby boomer, you're more likely to be a Democrat. And as you age, that continues to be true. And if you were born in the late baby boom or early Gen Xer, if you were born in the 1960s, that's kind of the most Republican group. And it was 5 or 10 years ago, and it is today.
Let's talk about the upcoming debates. Typically debates, it's kind of like the thing that everybody kind of looks forward to as people start tuning in after Labor Day and say, okay, I'll pay attention now. I'm going to tune into this debate. Do debates, first of all, do they really change races anymore in this day and age in politics?
Well, we don't have a lot of great examples. I mean, a lot of people think, 20 years ago that Al Gore was hurt in the debates against George W. Bush and that might have cost him. But then we have a more recent example of 2012 when in the first debate, Barack Obama was seen as having a bad debate. And we even saw his numbers decline and we saw that race really tighten up. And then, that effect faded. And I think in 2016, I think most of the conventional wisdom at the time was, if anything, Hillary Clinton may have done a little bit better than Donald Trump in the debates. Now, either that conventional wisdom was wrong or it's just a situation where the debates really weren't going to decide this thing. So I think what's different or what's interesting about the debates this time around is, obviously Donald Trump we've gotten plenty of exposure to Donald Trump and people, know what they're getting and their minds are made up. I think there is a bit more curiosity about how Joe Biden is going to perform And again, that's a little bit of a double-edged sword. I mean, there's some pressure on Joe Biden to prove himself in the debates, but at the same time, some people think the Republicans have lowered the bar for Joe Biden by, raising issues about questioning his cognitive abilities and questioning, his ability to think on his feet. And so you could have a situation where he comes in and performs competently in the debates, and that's seen as a kind of a victory for Joe Biden.
Thank you, Craig Gilbert. PBS NewsHour will carry the first presidential debate on September 29th at 8 p.m. Central Time. Milwaukee PBS continues our Vote 2020 coverage next week with Black Nouveau. Here's our newest colleague and Black Nouveau host, Earl Arms.
Thanks, Portia. During the primary last April, over 23,000 absentee ballots were ruled invalid. The vast majority, 22,000 of them, were thrown out because of the same mistake. We'll tell you what that mistake was, how not to make it this time, and offer other tips for making sure your vote gets counted. We'll also look at previous voter suppression tactics, as well as some potential ones for this year.
Thanks, Earl, and welcome to Milwaukee PBS. That'll do it for this special edition of 1036 Vote 2020. Remember, check us out on Facebook and at milwaukeepbs.org. We leave you with Milwaukee's tribute to iconic Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg.